Hello and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're going to unpack a story that quite literally redefined the modern world. We're looking at how a single building in Michigan, Henry Ford's Highland Park Plant, completely re-engineered American society, sparked rapid urbanization, and changed the very nature of work itself. So let's just dive right into it. Now, this whole explainer is going to center around one fascinating underlying tension. Did the invention of the assembly line free the average worker by giving them the purchasing power to basically build the modern middle class? Or, on the flip side, did it trap them in a system that standardized human labor exactly like a machine? Keep that central question rolling around in the back of your mind as we go through the evidence today. All right, Section 1, Highland Park's Crystal Palace. To really wrap our heads around the magnitude of what happened here, we have to set the stage. What we now call Highland Park, just north of Detroit, well, it didn't start as some industrial juggernaut. Back in the late 1800s, it was mostly just an agricultural stretch of land known as Whitewood. But things started shifting really quickly when developers brought in one of the nation's very first electric streetcar systems in 1886. That direct, easy connection to Detroit completely transformed the area into a prime suburban and industrial spot, setting the perfect foundation for what was about to happen. And on that exact foundation, they built a literal cathedral of modern industry. In 1910, Henry Ford officially moved his vehicle production from the older Piquette Street plant to this massive, new 60-acre facility in Highland Park. It was designed by the renowned architect Albert Kahn, and people actually nicknamed it the Crystal Palace because of the sheer size of the glass windows built right into the roofs and walls.
Moving right along to Section 2, the moving assembly line. Now, what made this building so incredibly historic wasn't just the architecture. It was the massive technological breakthrough happening inside those glass walls, starting around October 1913. Ford's engineers instituted this really rigid standardization of tasks, something based on Taylorism, which led to progressive or line production. Basically, instead of workers walking all around the factory to build a car piece by piece, the whole factory was treated like one giant integrated system. The work itself flowed along a predetermined path, from the foundry to the machine shop, directly to the men stationed on the final assembly line. And the sheer, jaw-dropping scale of the efficiency gains here, it's honestly hard to believe. Before this moving assembly line, it took 12 and a half hours to build a single Model T. But after those 1913 experiments, they slashed that assembly time down to a mere 93 minutes. So what does that mean for everyone else? Well, because production costs absolutely plummeted, the price of the Model T was dramatically slashed. It originally cost around $850, which was a lot of money back then, but it dropped down to a remarkably affordable $260. Almost overnight, the average working family could actually afford a car, and public demand just skyrocketed.
Okay, Section 3, the turnover crisis.
Now, this explosive gain in production, it came with a pretty disastrous, unintended consequence for the workforce. Mass production completely altered the social dynamics of the shop floor. Look back at the end of the 19th century. Proud, self-supervising craftsmen made up about 40% of the industrial workforce. But once the assembly line reduced the work to these simple, dis-skilled, repetitive tasks, those demographics totally flipped. By 1917, over 55% of the Highland Park workforce were unskilled specialists doing highly rote labor. I want to read this quote to you from an observer named John Fitch, because I think it perfectly captures the crushing reality for the workers at the time. It may be fine to see an automobile come through that door every 20 seconds, but you don't see them if your job is to start the nuts on the threads. You haven't time. The work was just incredibly monotonous. It was intensely supervised by foremen and straw bosses, and it was pushed at a relentless, unforgiving pace. And the data proves exactly how miserable that reality was. By 1913, worker discontent was off the charts. Daily absenteeism was hitting 10%. But here's the crazy part. The yearly labor turnover rate was a staggering 370%. To just maintain his existing integrated production system, Henry Ford had to hire 52,000 new workers in a single year. It was an absolute crisis, and it was entirely unsustainable. Which leads us to Section 4, the $5 day. To save this assembly line, Ford needed a desperate, radical business solution. On January 5, 1914, Henry Ford and his vice president, James Couzens, generated these massive, glowing newspaper headlines all over the globe when they announced a truly shocking policy. They were doubling their workers' wages to $5 a day.
The idea of a wealthy industrialist sharing profits with his workers on that scale, it was entirely unprecedented. But there was a massive catch hiding behind those headlines. It wasn't actually a standard, no questions asked raise. It was a two-part profit-sharing scheme. An unskilled worker still made a base wage of about $2.40 a day. The remaining $2.60 was a profit-sharing bonus. And getting your hands on that bonus came with some very, very strict behavioral strings attached.
And that brings us to Section 5, the sociological department.
This is where we get into the fascinating and honestly quite invasive lengths the company went to. To manage this new pay structure, Ford established what historians call industrial paternalism. Basically, it's a comprehensive effort by an employer to control the social, cultural, and personal lives of its workforce. Ford used this to socially engineer his largely pre-industrial immigrant workforce into adopting the exact personal habits required to survive modern factory life. So he created the sociological department to handle the social engineering. And yes, you heard that right. Investigators literally monitored workers' financial habits, and they would actually show up at your house to inspect it for cleanliness. They also required employees to attend the Ford English School to learn proper American values. Only if a worker proved they were living what the company deemed a worthy lifestyle did they receive their full $5 pay. In the end, standardizing production ultimately required standardizing the labor itself. Now, Ford and his supporters absolutely viewed this department as a benevolent tool to help elevate his employees. But, as you might guess, it is widely documented that the workers deeply, deeply resented this level of intrusion into their private lives. Eventually, recognizing that this intense monitoring was just unsustainable, Ford largely dissolved the department by 1921. Finally, let's look at Section 6, creating the middle class. Regardless of the controversy surrounding how it was implemented, the economic legacy that rippled out from this single plant was monumental. When Ford raised wages to $5 a day, other automakers and parts suppliers were suddenly forced to match that pay just to compete for labor. Over time, this established a genuine living wage across multiple industries. Workers finally had comfort and security above just basic survival. They could actually afford to buy the goods they were manufacturing, which fueled an incredible middle-class boom. And you can literally see that economic boom playing out in the rapid urbanization of communities around the plant. Driven by that $5 day, Highland Park's employment peaked at almost 70,000 workers by 1925. This massive explosion of relatively well-paid industrial jobs directly spurred the rapid growth of prosperous residential neighborhoods, historic apartment buildings, and vibrant civic institutions right there in the community. So what did this all mean for Henry Ford himself? Well, despite paying totally unprecedented wages and drastically lowering the price of his cars, the sheer, unimaginable volume of Model T sales generated by this huge new pool of middle-class consumers made up for all of it. Between 1910 and 1919, this economic formula was so immensely profitable that it made Henry Ford the world's very first billionaire. Which brings us right back full circle to our opening question. Looking at all the evidence we've covered today, what do you think? Did the Highland Park assembly line and the $5 day free the average worker by lifting them out of poverty and creating the modern middle class? Or did it trap them in a rigid system of industrial paternalism that standardized their labor and their personal lives just like parts of a machine? It is a deeply complex, world-changing legacy to reflect on. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I encourage you to keep questioning the history that built our modern world.